They told the world it never happened. No speeches, no medals, no history books, just shadows moving through jungles, deserts, and silent cities where even whispers could get you killed. Tonight, you are stepping inside one of the most brutal secret wars the CIA ever fought. A war buried so deep that even the soldiers who survived were ordered to forget it. And if stories like this matter to you, take 1 second right now to like the video and subscribe to Clandestine Combat, because this channel exists to uncover the missions that governments tried to erase. In the early years of the Cold War, fear was everywhere. Not the loud fear of bombs falling, but the quiet fear of influence spreading. Washington believed that if one nation slipped into the enemy's hands, others would fall like dominoes. So instead of sending armies with flags, they sent ghosts. Men without uniforms, operations without names, wars without official beginnings, and without endings. Deep inside classified rooms, maps were covered with pins that the public would never see. Remote valleys in Asia, hidden airstrips in Central America, border towns where languages mixed and loyalties could be bought. The mission sounded simple when spoken in calm voices. Stop the enemy before the world knows. But simple words hid brutal realities, because secret wars do not follow rules. There are no cameras, no clear victories, and no one coming to rescue you if things go wrong. The men chosen for these missions were not always the strongest. They were the quietest. Farmers' sons, former soldiers, pilots who could fly in darkness with failing instruments. Many were promised their country would remember them. Most would learn that secrecy means silence forever. They trained in places that did not officially exist, learning how to disappear into crowds, how to survive, capture, and how to fight alongside allies who might betray them tomorrow. Trust became a weapon. Doubt became protection. Soon, the operation expanded beyond anything first imagined. Supply planes flew at night with their lights off, landing on strips carved out of wilderness. Local fighters were armed, guided, and sometimes abandoned when politics changed thousands of miles away. Every success created a new danger. Every failure had to be hidden. Reports were rewritten. Casualties were renamed, and families back home received explanations that sounded clean, but were never true. What made this secret war especially brutal was not just the fighting, it was the isolation. Imagine risking your life in a battle your country refuses to admit exists. Imagine watching friends disappear into jungles or prisons, knowing you cannot even say where they died. This was the psychological weight carried by people who lived in permanent denial of recognition. Victory, if it came at all, would arrive quietly. Defeat would be buried even deeper. And yet, despite the silence, the consequences shaped the world we live in today. Governments rose and fell because of actions no newspaper reported. Entire regions changed direction because of decisions made in darkness. The public saw only headlines. The truth stayed locked in vaults marked classified. This is only the beginning of the story, because the deeper we go, the more dangerous it becomes. Far from the cameras, the conflict began to take shape in places most Americans could not even find on a map. Mountain trails turned into supply routes, small villages became listening posts. What looked like scattered unrest from the outside was, in truth, a carefully managed battlefield where every movement was watched, measured, and quietly influenced. CIA officers worked through layers of intermediaries, rarely revealing who they really were. Money moved in unmarked crates. Weapons arrived without serial numbers, and alliances were formed not through speeches, but through survival. The brutality revealed itself slowly. At first, it was just rumors of ambushes in dense jungle valleys where rescue helicopters could not land. Then came stories of entire units vanishing after crossing invisible lines drawn only on secret maps. Prisoners were rarely discussed, because acknowledging them meant admitting the war existed. Some captives were interrogated in hidden compounds. Others simply disappeared into systems designed to leave no trace. In a conflict without official rules, mercy became unpredictable, and fear became constant. Pilots carried one of the heaviest burdens, flying low through hostile skies at night. They delivered supplies to fighters who depended on every crate of ammunition and food. Anti-aircraft fire could appear without warning, turning routine missions into desperate escapes through clouds and darkness. If a plane went down, rescue was never guaranteed. Officially, the aircraft might never have been there at all. Families at home would hear only fragments, carefully worded, stripped of truth. The silence protected strategy, but it punished sacrifice. On the ground, local forces paid the highest price. They fought for promises, whispered in backrooms protection. Support, a future that might never arrive. When operations succeeded, credit stayed hidden. When they failed, blame spread quickly. Entire communities were caught between opposing powers, forced to choose sides in a war they did not start. Survival often depended on guessing which invisible hand was stronger that week. Many guessed wrong. Inside Washington, the pressure never stopped. Leaders demanded results without headlines, victories without escalation, control without responsibility. Each decision pushed operatives deeper into moral gray zones, where clear right and wrong no longer existed. Some believed they were preventing a larger global catastrophe. Others wondered if the secrecy itself was creating new disasters. But once the machine of covert war was moving, stopping it became almost impossible. Too many lives, too many secrets, too much momentum. Years passed, and the mission kept expanding beyond its original purpose. What began as containment slowly turned into entanglement. More funding, more weapons, more risks. The deeper the involvement grew, the harder it became to admit the cost. Because revealing the truth would not just expose a battlefield, it would expose the illusion that it had ever been under control. And in the shadows where this war lived, losing control was the most dangerous outcome of all. Time changed the landscape, but it did not reduce the violence. Instead, the conflict adapted, spreading quietly across borders that meant little to the people fighting on the ground. Paths once used for trade became corridors for weapons. Rivers carried supplies by night, and boaties by morning. Every success demanded another operation to protect it, and every operation created new enemies who had nothing left to lose. In secret wars, momentum can feel like victory, even when it is only pulling everyone deeper into danger. CIA field officers learned to live with constant uncertainty. Messages arrived late or not at all. Allies switched sides after a single payment or threat. Intelligence that looked solid in a briefing room could collapse the moment boots touched mud. Decisions had to be made in seconds, often with consequences that would last for years. There were no perfect choices, only risks measured against worse risks. And when something went wrong, responsibility rarely followed clear lines. It dissolved into secrecy, buried under layers of classification. Some of the harshest moments came not during battles, but in the quiet hours after. Villages damaged by airstrikes, families searching for missing relatives. Fighters realizing the support they depended on might disappear with the next political shift. These were scenes the public was never meant to witness, yet they defined the true cost of the operation. War without acknowledgement removes even the small comfort of recognition. Suffering becomes invisible, which can make it feel endless. Back in the United States, ordinary life continued untouched. Streets were calm. News cycles moved on. Few people understood that faraway actions taken in their country's name were reshaping entire regions. This distance made the secrecy easier to maintain, but it also widened the gap between decision and consequence. The further the battlefield felt, the simpler the choices appeared. On the ground, nothing was simple. Every move carried weight measured in lives. Within the intelligence community, doubts slowly grew. Some officers questioned whether the mission's original purpose still existed. Others feared that withdrawing would cause even greater chaos. Reports became more cautious. Language softened. Failures were described as adjustments. Progress was measured in fragments that could be interpreted many ways. The truth was becoming harder to define, even for those inside the system. Yet the war continued, driven by habit as much as strategy. New recruits arrived, trained quickly, and sent into environments veterans knew were unforgiving. Hope mixed with exhaustion. Courage mixed with quiet resignation. Many understood they were part of something history might never fully reveal. Still, they moved forward because in secret conflicts, turning back is rarely presented as an option. What none of them realized was that events already in motion would soon force this hidden war closer to the surface, where denial would become harder to sustain and the real scale of the brutality could no longer remain completely unseen. Pressure built slowly, then all at once. Small incidents that once stayed buried in classified reports began leaking into conversations, then into whispers among journalists, diplomats, and families searching for answers. Pieces of the hidden war were slipping beyond control. Not enough to reveal everything, but enough to create unease inside the very system designed to keep the truth contained. The deeper the secrecy had gone, the more dangerous exposure became. On the battlefield, conditions were growing harsher. Supplies that once arrived regularly became unpredictable. Air support was delayed by politics instead of weather. Fighters who had depended on quiet promises started to sense those promises weakening. Morale shifted in subtle ways: less confidence, more hesitation, longer silences before missions. In covert war, belief can be as important as ammunition, and once belief begins to crack, collapse is never far behind. Some operatives pushed harder, convinced that stronger action could still secure victory before everything unraveled. Others became cautious, sensing that the mission's foundation was no longer stable. This divide created tension not just in strategy rooms, but in the field where hesitation could mean death. Orders felt heavier, risks felt sharper, and every new operation carried the quiet question no one wanted to ask out loud. Was any of this still working? For local communities trapped in the conflict, brutality had become routine. Children grew up recognizing the sound of aircraft before they could read. Families learned to move at night, hide during the day, and trust almost no one. Survival replaced normal life. Years of quiet war reshaped culture itself, leaving scars that would remain long after the fighting stopped. These were consequences no classified document could fully measure. Inside government offices, language grew more careful. Briefings focused on stability, progress, and long-term positioning. Words like failure or withdrawal were avoided, not because they were impossible, but because admitting them would force public questions, and public questions could expose everything: the cost, the methods, the human toll hidden behind strategy. Maintaining silence was becoming as important as maintaining control on the ground. But history has a way of pushing secrets toward light. A lost aircraft, a captured fighter willing to talk, a document copied when no one was watching. Any single moment could fracture the illusion. Leaders understood this, yet the machinery of covert war kept moving, driven by fear of what might happen if it suddenly stopped. Sometimes, the most dangerous decision is not escalation, but honesty. As the years of shadow conflict stretched on, one reality became impossible to ignore. Even if the operation achieved its objectives, the damage, political, human, and moral, had already spread far beyond the original battlefield. And once consequences reach that scale, ending a secret war does not truly end it. It only begins the long process of reckoning that follows silence. By the time the first serious questions reached powerful offices, the war had already changed too many lives to be quietly erased. What began as a contained operation now stretched across years of decisions, losses, and compromises that could not simply be filed away. Every report carried numbers, but numbers never showed the full picture. Behind each statistic was a name, a face, a moment of fear that would never appear in official language. And the longer the silence continued, the heavier that invisible weight became. Some within the system started to prepare for the possibility that secrecy might fail. Plans were discussed in careful tones: how to explain involvement without revealing methods, how to acknowledge sacrifice without admitting responsibility. It was a delicate balance between truth and protection. Reveal too much and political consequences could erupt. Reveal too little and trust could fracture in ways that lasted for generations. This quiet calculation unfolded far from the people who had carried the real danger. On the ground, fighters sensed the shift before any announcement was made. Support felt thinner. Communication felt slower. Missions that once seemed urgent were suddenly delayed or cancelled. Rumors spread through camps and villages, each version slightly different but carrying the same message. Something was ending. In war, uncertainty can be more terrifying than combat. Because at least, combat offers clarity. Waiting offers only imagination. Imagination often goes to the darkest place. For CIA operatives who had lived inside this hidden conflict, the approaching end created its own kind of tension. Many had spent years believing their work was preventing a larger catastrophe. If the mission ended without clear victory, what did that mean for the sacrifices already made? Questions like that rarely appear in declassified files, yet they linger in memory long after operations close. The battlefield may fall silent, but doubt has a way of continuing the fight internally. Local allies faced the greatest fear of all: abandonment. History had shown them what happens when powerful nations step back from secret wars. Promises fade, protection disappears, and those left behind must answer for alliances that once seemed necessary for survival. Some prepared escape routes, others chose to stay, hoping the danger would pass. Many had no choice at all. Geographies and circumstance can trap people as effectively as any prison. Meanwhile, far from the conflict, ordinary citizens remained mostly unaware. Daily life moved forward with familiar routines, untouched by decisions made in secrecy. This distance allowed leaders to manage the ending quietly, shaping narratives before the public even knew a story existed. But distance does not erase consequence. It only delays recognition of it, and delayed recognition often arrives with greater force. As momentum slowed and silence deepened, one final question hovered over everything. When the shadows finally pulled back, would the truth bring closure, or simply reveal how much had been lost in a war nobody was ever meant to see? The closing phase did not arrive with a clear announcement or a final battle. Instead, it unfolded in fragments: withdrawn support here, a cancelled mission there, a quiet reassignment that signaled something larger was ending. To outsiders, nothing seemed different. But to those inside the hidden machinery of the war, every small change felt final. Years of tension were slowly giving way to uncertainty. And uncertainty can feel heavier than danger when purpose begins to fade. Some operatives left the region carrying memories they could never fully explain. Their service would remain classified, their experiences reduced to vague descriptions even among family. They returned to normal streets that felt strangely distant from the places they had survived. Noise sounded different. Silence felt unfamiliar. Secret war leaves marks that are difficult to see, but impossible to forget. And without recognition, healing becomes a private struggle. For local fighters and communities, the ending was far less quiet. Power vacuums formed quickly, pulling old rivalries back to the surface. Groups that once united against a common enemy now faced each other with suspicion. Weapons remained, training remained, anger remained. When an outside force disappears, it rarely takes the consequences with it. Instead, those consequences spread, reshaping the future in ways no strategist can fully control. Documents began their long journey toward decline. Pages were reviewed, edited, sometimes erased entirely. What the public might one day see would be only a partial reflection of reality. The most sensitive truths often remain buried, not just to protect methods, but to avoid reopening wounds that never properly closed. History, in these cases, becomes a carefully managed version of memory. Inside government institutions, attention shifted to new threats, new regions, new calculations. The world had not become safer, only different. Lessons from the secret war were studied quietly, shaping future operations that would follow similar patterns in other places. Success and failure blended together into doctrine. And so, even as this hidden conflict faded, its influence continued moving forward through decisions yet to be made. For years afterward, traces of the operation surfaced in unexpected ways. a veteran speaking carefully in an interview, a journalist uncovering a forgotten airstrip, a family still searching for answers about someone who never came home. Each fragment hinted at a larger story just beyond reach. Piece by piece, the outline of the secret war grew clearer, though never complete. Some truths resist full discovery, especially when silence was part of the original design. And as time passed, a deeper realization emerged. The most brutal part of a secret war is not always the violence itself, but the silence that follows, the way sacrifice can vanish from public memory, leaving only questions behind. Questions about necessity, about morality, about whether anything truly justified the cost paid in shadows. Years turned into decades, and the world kept moving. But the hidden war never completely disappeared. It lived on in classified archives, in aging memories, and in landscapes still shaped by decisions made in secrecy. Forest paths once used for covert supply runs became ordinary trails again. Yet, beneath the quiet soil remained fragments of stories and grief that time could soften but never erase. History does not forget. It only grows quieter. For the people who had fought without recognition, silence became part of daily life. Some tried to rebuild, focusing on family, work, and routines that felt safe compared to the uncertainty of the past. Others struggled with memories that returned in unexpected moments. The sound of distant aircraft, the smell of rain on dirt, the sudden feeling of being watched. Without public acknowledgement, their experiences existed in isolation, shared only with those who had stood in the same shadows. In the United States, occasional documents surfaced, each release offering a brief glimpse into what had once been hidden. Journalists pieced together timelines, historians debated motives and consequences, citizens asked quiet questions about what had been done in their name. Yet every revelation felt incomplete, like reading chapters torn from a larger book. The full story remained scattered, protected by the same secrecy that had defined the war itself. Moral questions grew louder with time. Was the conflict truly necessary, or had fear-driven decisions beyond reason? Did preventing one possible future justify the suffering that followed? Governments rarely answer such questions directly, because clear answers can create accountability, and accountability can reopen events many would prefer remain closed. Still, the questions persisted, carried forward by those unwilling to let silence become the final truth. For regions where the fighting occurred, consequences stretched across generations. Political instability, economic struggle, and social division traced roots back to years of invisible conflict. Children inherited realities shaped before they were born. Even peace carried echoes of what came before. Secret wars may end on paper, but their impact continues in ways statistics cannot measure. Within intelligence circles, the operation became a lesson studied not only for strategy, but for warning. Future planners examined what worked, what failed, and what should never be repeated. Yet history shows that lessons learned in secrecy are often repeated in secrecy. The cycle is difficult to break when fear returns wearing a new face. This is why stories like this still matter today. Not for blame alone, and not for curiosity, but for understanding the true cost of decisions made beyond public view. Because when a war is hidden, so is its price, and a price that remains unseen is a price that can be paid again. As more time passed, the hidden edges of the conflict slowly blended into ordinary history, yet something about it refused to settle. Survivors aged, witnesses disappeared, and physical evidence faded, but unanswered questions remained suspended between memory and silence. Some people preferred it that way. Forgetting can feel safer than confronting truths that challenge national pride or personal belief. But forgetting also leaves space for the same patterns to return under different names. In quiet rooms where policy is shaped, the legacy of the secret war never truly left. Strategies born in shadow influenced new operations in distant regions, guided by the belief that unseen action could still control dangerous outcomes. Technology changed, language evolved, and methods became more precise. Yet the central idea remained familiar: fight without being seen, win without being blamed, and accept that the full story may never belong to the public. It is a powerful idea and a dangerous one. For historians and investigators, each newly released document felt like uncovering a fragment of buried ground. A date confirmed, a location revealed, a decision finally explained. But every answer created new mysteries, hinting at deeper layers still sealed away. Truth, in these cases, does not arrive all at once. It emerges slowly, often long after the people involved are gone. By the time clarity appears, justice and closure may already be out of reach. The human cost, however, never needed documents to be real. It existed in empty seats at family tables, in names carved into small memorials, far from public attention, in communities that carried loss without recognition. These quiet reminders formed a different kind of record, one written, not in ink, but in absence. An absence can speak more powerfully than any official statement. Viewers of Clandestine Combat often ask why stories buried for decades should matter now. The answer is simple and unsettling at the same time, because the forces that created those secret wars feared rivalry, the desire for control, hath never truly disappeared. They wait for moments of tension, ready to justify actions hidden from view. Understanding the past is not about changing it. It is about recognizing the warning signs when they appear again. Even today, there are operations the public will not hear about until many years have passed. Somewhere, decisions are being made in silence, shaped by lessons drawn from conflicts like this one. The names and locations are different, but the shadows feel familiar, and that familiarity raises a final, uncomfortable thought. If secrecy once allowed brutality to grow unnoticed, what might still be happening beyond the edges of what we are allowed to see? That question does not come with an easy answer. Secret wars are designed specifically to prevent clear understanding. Information is divided, delayed, and often reshaped before it ever reaches the public. By the time truth appears, it is usually surrounded by years of interpretation, denial, and fading memory. This makes accountability fragile and meaning difficult to hold on to. Yet the search for truth continues, carried by journalists, historians, families, and ordinary people who refuse to let silence be the final version of events. What makes this particular hidden conflict so unsettling is not only the scale of violence, but how ordinary it seemed to those directing it from far away. Meetings were scheduled, reports were typed, decisions were approved with calm language and careful reasoning. On paper, everything looked controlled and rational. But far from those rooms, reality unfolded in chaos, fear, and irreversible loss. This distance between decision and consequence is one of the defining features of covert war and one of its greatest moral dangers. Some defenders of the operation argued that harsh action prevented even greater catastrophe. They believed that without intervention, entire regions might have fallen into deeper conflict, pulling the world toward something far worse. Others believed the secrecy removed necessary limits, allowing suffering to expand without public restraint. These opposing views still exist today, shaping how people interpret the same history in completely different ways. Truth, in this sense, becomes divided between perspective and proof. For those who lived through the conflict directly, debate matters less than memory. They remember the sounds, the fear, the moments of loyalty and betrayal that defined survival. Many carried those memories quietly for decades, waiting for a time when speaking might finally be allowed. Some told their stories late in life, others never spoke at all. When witnesses disappear, history grows quieter. Silence becomes easier to accept. This is why reflection matters now more than ever, not to reopen wounds without purpose, but to understand how easily secrecy can reshape morality. When actions are hidden, the normal boundaries of right and wrong can blur. Urgency replaces caution. Strategy replaces empathy. And step by step, choices that once felt unthinkable begin to feel necessary. By the time doubt returns, the damage is already done. Still, awareness offers a different path. The more openly history is examined, the harder it becomes for similar darkness to grow unnoticed. Stories once buried can become warnings instead of secrets. Memory, when protected, can act as a form of accountability that secrecy was meant to avoid. And that leads to the final part of this story, because endings in secret wars are never truly simple. And what remains after the silence can reveal more than the conflict itself ever did. In the end, the battlefield did not deliver a clear victory or a clean defeat. It delivered something far more complicated, an unfinished story carried forward by memory, secrecy, and consequence. The weapons fell silent, the operations closed, and the documents slowly gathered dust. Yet the impact continued moving through time, in ways no strategy had fully predicted. This is often how secret wars truly end. Not with resolution, but with echo. For the governments involved, the conflict became a chapter handled carefully, referenced in controlled language, and revealed only in fragments when pressure demanded transparency. For the intelligence officers who had lived inside it, the experience became something quieter and more personal, a collection of moments impossible to fully share, defined by choices made under pressure where certainty never existed. And for the people whose lands became the hidden battlefield, the war never felt secret at all. It felt immediate, permanent, and deeply human. History may never uncover every detail of what happened in this brutal shadow conflict. Some records will remain sealed. Some decisions will remain unexplained. Some names will never be publicly spoken. But incomplete truth is still truth, and even fragments can illuminate patterns that repeat across generations. When we study these hidden wars, we are not only looking backward, we are also looking at the forces that continue shaping the present. If there is a single lesson buried inside this story, it is that secrecy carries a cost that grows over time. Silence can protect strategy, but it can also protect mistakes. It can delay accountability, but it cannot erase consequence. Eventually, even the most carefully hidden conflict leaves traces, questions that return, memories that surface, and histories that demand to be understood. The only uncertainty is how long that understanding will take. That is why conversations like this matter, not because they change the past, but because they shape how the future is faced. When viewers choose to learn about the wars nobody was supposed to know about, they challenge the idea that silence is acceptable. They turn hidden sacrifice into shared memory, and in doing so, they make it harder for darkness to operate without witness. If this story made you think differently about history, secrecy, or the true cost of power, share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective keeps these forgotten stories alive. And if you want more deep, honest explorations of the world's most hidden conflicts, make sure you are subscribed to Clandestine Combat and share this video with someone who believes history should never stay buried. Because the moment we stop looking into the shadows is the moment the shadows grow strongest.